Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we are on the chapter of the iddah of the woman. We have finished talking about the rules and regulations of the ihdad, and also we mentioned in the previous track that the Walad does not observe the 4 months and 10 days if her master dies, and that this period is specific to the wife. We also mentioned the correct opinion that the qar mentioned in the Quran about the 3 quru refers to the haydah, the actual menstrual period. It does not refer to the period of purity in between the menstruation. And we also mentioned this idea that the servant woman waits in the iddah for 2 menstrual cycles or 1.5 months if she does not menstruate. And also the difference of opinion, does the servant woman have 2 divorces or the full 3 like the non-servant woman? So now let us continue with the chapter, and we'll take hadith number 971. وعن رفيع بن ثابت رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يحل لامرئ يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر أن يسقي ماءه زرع غيره. أخرجه أبو داود والترمذي وصححه ابن حبان وحسنه البزار. From Rufay' ibn Thabit that the Prophet said, it is not halal for a man who has iman in Allah and the last day to give his water to somebody else's crops. This hadith is Hasan. The water which he is talking about is not the water of irrigation, meaning the H2O water. Rather, it is talking about the sperm of the man. That's his water. As Allah says about the creation of man, خُلِقَ مِن مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ, that man has been created from water which shoots out. So this water is not the H2O chemical substance that we know of, that we can drink, but rather this water is the semen, and the produce or the crops which he's talking about is the child who is in the belly of the mother. So if a woman is pregnant with the child of one man, then the second man is not allowed to have intercourse with this woman, because what he'll be doing then is that he'll be putting his water, meaning his semen, on the produce, we can say the crops, of another man. So the Prophet here is likening the normal farming to the child being born. So just as you put the seed in the ground and this produces the crops, so likewise the husband puts his seed into the plowing field, and that's his wife, and so the crops are produced, and this produce, or the crops if you like, is the actual child. So we can see that the 2 scenarios are analogous. And Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us in the Quran, نِسَاؤُكُمْ حَرْثٌ لَكُمْ فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّا شِئْتُمْ, that your women are your plowing fields, so go to your plowing fields however you wish. Meaning to say, you can have intercourse with your wives however you wish to, in whatever position. So Allah Jalla wa Ala uses the word harth, or the plowing field, not just for the normal agriculture plowing field, but rather for the wife as well. So based upon this, we say that this hadith is not a metaphor. There is no such thing as a metaphor in the Arabic language, as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says. Rather, everything is real and reality. It is haqiqah, it is not majaz. And the way you understand every word is in the context. So if we take a look at the context of the speech, then everything becomes literal and nothing is metaphor. Because we can simply say that who told you that the word ma, or water, only ever refers to the H2O? It can also refer to the semen. And who told you that the word zara, or the crops or produce, only ever refers to the agricultural crops and produce? Rather, it can refer to the child as well. And each of these words will be understood in the proper context. So there is nothing metaphorical about this hadith, nor any other hadith, nor any ayah in the Quran. Rather, we say every word is understood by its context. And this is the better opinion, because when we open up the doors to the metaphors, then people will start using metaphors to deny the names and attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and we enter into complications pertaining to the aqidah. So we, from the very beginning, shut off this door. The point about the majaz, or the metaphor, is that it can be denied. If you use metaphor, somebody can come to you and tell you, no, but this is not what you actually mean, is it? You mean something else. The point is, it can be denied. This is a metaphor. But the kalam of Allah Jalla wa Ala in the Quran cannot be denied ever. Meaning to say, you can never tell Allah, oh, no, Allah, you don't mean this, do you? You actually mean something else. Nobody can say this to Allah. So if you cannot say this to Allah, then it follows that there is no metaphor in the Quran. The hadith says, لا يحل, it is not halal. So the only alternative there is that it is haram. If something is not halal, there is no other alternative, it has to be haram. So we say that if a man purchases a servant woman and she is pregnant from her previous master, then it is not permissible for this man to have intercourse with this woman. And if he was to do this, then does this mean that he is not a proper believer? Because the hadith says it is not halal for a man who has iman in Allah on the last day. Well, we say that he is a mu'min, but a highly deficient one. Because if he had true and strong iman in Allah on the last day, he would not have done what he did. So even though he has the aslul iman, the original iman, which keeps him in the fold of Islam, we say he is deficient. If a man is married to a woman, and this woman has intercourse with another man in a wat or shubha, so she thought that it was halal, but in the end it was haram. Let's say it was dark and this man had intercourse with her. He could not see her properly. If she becomes pregnant, then it is not permissible for her proper husband to have intercourse with her, because he would be putting his water into somebody else's crops. As for a woman who is pregnant from a previous marriage, then we know it is not permissible for her to get married to another man, and so this would prevent the second man from having intercourse with this woman and putting his water into somebody else's produce. And like we said before, the reason why the Prophet mentions Iman in Allah on the last day is to encourage people strongly to obey this law. That if you truly have Iman in Allah on the last day, and every Muslim wants to be of this status, that he has true Iman in Allah on the last day, then this will encourage the Muslims to obey this rule. It's much like saying to somebody, if you are a kind and noble person, then you will give this guest of yours water to drink. Now we know everybody wants to be a kind and noble person, so therefore this would encourage that man to give the guest water to drink. What is understood from this hadith then is that if a man has a wife and she's pregnant with his child, then it is permissible for him to have intercourse with her whilst she is pregnant, because he now would not be watering somebody else's produce. Hadith 972. وعن عمر رضي الله عنه في امرأة المفقود تربص 4 سنين ثم تعتد 4 أشهر و10 أخرجه مالك والشافعي. From Umar, it is a narration from him, he gave the judgment about a woman whose husband has gone missing. He says that she needs to wait 4 years, and then afterwards she would wait for 4 months and 10 days. This narration has been graded as authentic. We have already spoken about the 6 categories of the iddah period, and from those categories is the woman whose husband has gone missing. And we said that the ulama divided it up into 2 categories: the type of journey in which death is a real possibility, and a type of journey in which you don't expect death. So this narration is talking about the type of journey in which you do expect death. So she would wait for 4 years, then after 4 years they would judge the husband to be dead. And then after that she would wait for 4 months and 10 days, which is the ihdad period. Of course, nowadays it's difficult to envisage how a husband is away from the wife and all news is broken off, because we have many means of staying in touch with people on the other end of the world. But nevertheless, this is useful knowledge for us to know about. We said that the correct opinion here is that in all cases it is left down to the judge to decide. Now in this narration, Umar decided that she should wait for 4 years, and then after, wait for the ihdad period. But this is a particular occurrence during the time of Umar. Nowadays, the Qadi might decide something completely different. So we simply say that in a situation like this, where the news has been cut off, we turn to the Qadi and he will decide how to proceed. So each individual instance is to be treated on its own merits. And we discussed the issue that if this woman waits out for the iddah and then she marries a second man, and then afterwards the first man returns then we said the correct opinion is that in all cases the first man is given a choice. If he wants to take her back, he can take her back. And if he wants to leave her with the second husband, he can also do this. Some scholars said that he takes her back in all cases, which we mentioned previously, of course, and we say that this is not the ideal option to take, because it could be that now that this first husband sees that his wife has been married to the second man, his desire for her may be greatly reduced. And also he might feel that because she has married this second man, maybe now she is more attached to this second man than him. So we ought to give this first man a choice. And if we forcefully give the wife back to the first husband, then it could also be a transgression against the second man as well, because maybe he feels attached to her. So we say the most balanced opinion is that we give the husband, meaning the first husband, the choice in all cases. If he does take her back, then if the second husband knew that he was marrying a woman whose husband has gone missing, then the first husband does not need to give the mahar back to the second husband. If the second husband was duped, or he did not know that he was marrying a woman whose first husband has gone missing, then in a case like this, the second husband has the right to take his mahar back from the wife, because the wife should have informed the second husband. So now the shortcoming is with the wife. If the first husband allows the woman to stay with the second husband, then the first husband does have the right to take his mahar from the second husband. If the second husband did not know about this, then he would take the mahar back from the wife, because the point is, he has lost his wife and it was not his fault. But if he's going to take the mahar back from the second husband, he is not allowed to take back more than he gave to the wife. So he's not allowed to say, well, the price nowadays is higher than it was, so we have to take into account the inflation, therefore you have to give me back more mahar than I gave the wife. He's not allowed to do this. Hadith 973 وعن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم امرأة المفقود امرأته حتى يأتيها البيان أخرجه الدارقطني بإسناد ضعيف. From Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, he says that the Prophet says that the wife of the man who has gone missing is still his wife until the news comes to her that the husband is dead. This narration is da'if, so it is weak in the sanad, but it is also weak in the meaning. How can we tell the wife that you have to remain until the news comes to you? What if the news does not come? This is clearly going to be a harm on the wife, is it not, if she's not allowed to remarry? This will be taking away her genuine rights. And we know in the Sharia that there must be no harm, neither intentional nor unintentional. And we know the general qaida that the harm must be removed. Just like the najasa must be removed, so harm also must be removed. So we say about this, just like we said in the previous narration, if the husband goes missing, the decision is down to the judge, who will decide the case in accordance with its merits. And we do not say how the Hanabila say, that if he has gone on a journey in which death is not likely, then the woman needs to wait until the husband reaches 90 years of his age. So then we can be sure he's dead, and then she waits for 4 months and 10 days. The problem is, who came up with this number 90? Whenever you come up with particular numbers, then you need to have a very specific hadith, because numbers are very specific ideas, and for these specific ideas you need specific ahadith, of which of course there are none. Hadith 974 وعن جابر رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يبيتن رجل عند امرأة إلا أن يكون ناكحا أو ذا محرم رواه مسلم. From Jabir, he says that the Prophet says that a man should not stay in the same house overnight with a woman except that he should be her husband or a mahram of her. Muslim reported it. Hadith 975 وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يخلون رجل بامرأة إلا مع ذي محرم أخرجه البخاري. From Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said that a man should not be alone with a woman except that she should have a mahram with her. Al-Bukhari reported it. The first action which we need to take before anything is to define the word mahram. Who is a mahram of a man or the mahram of a woman? We say that your mahram is a person who is never allowed to be married to you through the cause of blood relation, or breastfeeding relation, or marital relation, meaning the in-law relation. So, for the man, his mahram from blood relations are 7, as detailed in Surah An-Nisa: your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, the daughters of your brother, the daughters of your sister, this will be your nieces of course, and your maternal and paternal aunts. So these are 7 types of women. The exact 7 women apply to the breastfeeding relations. So if a woman, not your biological mother, breastfeeds you, then she becomes your mother through breastfeeding. Likewise, if she has daughters herself, then these daughters of hers, meaning her biological daughters, they become your sisters through breastfeeding. And if this woman has a husband, then her husband, who is not your biological father of course, he becomes your father through breastfeeding. And if this woman has sisters, then her sisters would become like your khala, your maternal aunt. And if the husband of this woman also has sisters, then these women will become your amma, who are your paternal aunts. And if this woman has sons and daughters, and these sons and daughters have daughters, then these women, meaning the daughters of your brother or sister through breastfeeding, would become like your nieces through breastfeeding, and it is haram for you to marry them. So in other words, the same 7 apply when it comes to the breastfeeding relations. Then we have the in-law relations, and these are 4 types of women. Firstly, any woman whom your father married. Secondly, the wife of your son, and this would definitely be your biological son. But as for your son through breastfeeding, then there's a difference of opinion. The third type is the mother of your wife. You are never allowed to marry her. And the fourth is the daughter of your wife. Obviously, this daughter is not from you, but this is on the condition that you've entered into privacy with this wife of yours, because you are allowed to marry this daughter as long as you have not entered into privacy with your wife. So these are the 4 types from the in-laws. But notice here that when a man separates from his wife through li'an, then he's never allowed to marry her. Does this now mean that this woman is a mahram to him? That he can be in privacy with her and travel with her and so on? The answer is no, because the mahram can only be established through one of these 3 aforementioned causes. So li'an is not one of them. So you need to know what a mahram is then. And it is often translated in English as chaperone. And this translation is highly deficient because a chaperone does not necessarily fulfill the criteria which we have just given. A chaperone can just be any man who is escorting the woman, and this is not sufficient as a mahram, as is well known. So this ruling about the khalwa, or being in privacy alone with each other, applies to the mad person as well as the sane person, but it does not apply to the young person who is below the age of adolescence, so he or she does not know about the private parts of a woman. The obvious question from this hadith is that what have these 2 hadith got to do with this chapter of Iddah? It appears what Al-Hafidh is trying to tell us here is that when a woman is in the Iddah period, she is not allowed to be alone with a non-mahram man. Or we could say that if a woman is divorced and she is a ba'ina, then she is not allowed to be alone with this husband who has divorced her for the 3rd time, because of course she is a non-mahram to him now, as opposed to the raj'i divorce, in which case she is definitely a wife. Being alone with a non-mahram woman is a cause which will lead to zina, and so we can see what the Sharia is doing here. It is blocking off any road which leads to zina. And this is what Allah Jalla wa Ala explicitly states in the Quran. He says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا, and don't even go near to zina. So he does not even say don't commit zina. He says don't even go near to zina. And being alone with a non-mahram woman is going near to zina. You might have a case where a woman is alone with the mahram, but the mahram is not a trustworthy person. The mahram might be a Muslim who simply does not have the fear of Allah, or a mahram might be a non-Muslim who evidently does not have the fear of Allah. So in a case like this, a woman should not even be alone with this type of mahram. And we know the hadith where if a woman is alone with another non-mahram man, then the third is the shaitan. Definitely he's going to inject some evil thoughts in your mind. We say the way to get rid of the khalwa is that a trustworthy third person should be in the room. Because if a trustworthy third person is in the room, then it does not hold true that they are in privacy. However, if this third person is not trustworthy and is somebody who might encourage zina, then no, this is still classified as khalwa. So we say it is not necessary that the third person should be the mahram of the woman, rather the third person should be a trustworthy person, and then it is not privacy anymore. And also this third person, in addition to being trustworthy, needs to be of a proper sound age. So we say he needs to be above the age of adolescence, in which case he would have some sense to know right from wrong. Some scholars have suggested that it could be somebody who is a mumayyiz, like the age of 7 years old, in which he is not adult, but he knows right from wrong, he understands the speech. But we say this is risky because normally this type of age would not suffice. We say that the minimum age needs to be the age of puberty. Because a person who is of 7 years of age, then if he is the third person between a man and a woman, then the man and the woman could be speaking about whatever they want, and this 7-year-old will not fully comprehend the complexity or the deeper inner meaning about what they are saying. So we say that this third person does need to be of a good age. And so in everyday life we have to be careful not to be in privacy with a non-mahram woman, and this applies to taxis. You should not be in privacy with another woman, even in a car or a taxi. Likewise, in a lift. In buildings we have lifts, and you're alone with a non-mahram woman in a lift. So if you're waiting for the lift, and there's a non-mahram woman waiting for the lift as well, then you let her go first, and you take the next lift. Sure, you might be delayed, but it is for the better. And also another important issue is the in-laws coming and entering upon the non-mahram women who are non-mahram. Because in the narration in the Sahih, the Prophet forbade to enter upon the non-mahram women. He said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالدُّخُولَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Be aware of entering upon non-mahram women in privacy. And the Prophet was asked, أَرَأَيْتَ الْحَمْوَ? Do you not see the brother-in-law? And the Prophet said that the brother-in-law is deaf. So the Prophet did not give any permission that the brother-in-law should enter upon into privacy with his sister-in-law. They are non-mahram and are not allowed to be in privacy. This is an issue which people may take lightly. Oh, she's a sister-in-law, she's part of the family, therefore they can be together in privacy, there's no problem, as if they were brothers and sisters. No. This is a great deception of the shaitan. If you are thinking like this, this is exactly how the shaitan wants people to think. What about if you're out in the open? Are you allowed to be alone with the woman there? Well, the point is this. Even if you're out in the open, let's say a street, it could still be that you are out of the view of the other people. And if it is the case, then this is haram. And even if it is the case that you are speaking and other people cannot hear your speech, then this is also considered as privacy. Because here then you could be speaking about anything, even intimate matters, and everybody would be none the wiser. So this takes the same ruling as khalwa, and it is haram. So notice then that even out in the open, in the street let's say, you could still be in privacy with a non-mahram woman. Is a man allowed to be in privacy with 2 other non-mahram women? Some scholars say no, this is not sufficient. The woman must have a mahram, and other scholars have said that in this case the privacy is no longer present because it's not one-to-one. Rather, because there is a third person there and she is trustworthy, then this is no longer a case of privacy. And the dangers which lead to zina are also no longer present. Allah Jalla wa Ala knows best, but it appears that the safest option is to avoid scenarios like these. And these scenarios can often happen when you have a workplace in which males and females are working all together. The Muslim should try to avoid workplaces like these, although in a kafir country it is not always feasible, but you have to fear Allah Jalla wa Ala as much as you are able to. And so you try to pick the most halal work environment you can possibly pick. Hadith number 976. وعن أبي سعيد رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال في سبايا أو طاس لا توضأ حامل حتى تضع ولا غير ذات حمل حتى تحيض حيضة. أخرجه أبو داود وصححه الحاكم وله شاهد عن ابن عباس في الدارقطني. From Abu Sa'id, the Prophet said about the women who were taken as war booty in the Battle of Awtas, he said about them that a pregnant woman, you are not allowed to have intercourse with her until she delivers the load. And as for the woman who is not pregnant, then you are not allowed to have intercourse with her until she undergoes one menstruation. This hadith is sahih. This battle of Awtas took place after Mecca was conquered in the 8th year of the Hijri calendar, and this place Awtas is along the way from Mecca to Al-Madinah. We know the Prophet ﷺ, when he conquered Mecca, he stayed there for 19 days. Then after that he headed for Thaqif, and along the way they had a battle of Awtas. And the Muslims won this battle, and from the war booty there were women. And these women are to be taken as concubines for the Muslim soldiers. And so of course the concubines are taken so you can have intercourse with them. However, there are rules. You are not allowed to have intercourse with a pregnant woman until she delivers the load. And we discussed the hadith for this before, that a man who has Iman in Allah on the last day should not water the crops of another man. But also, if she's not pregnant, then you have to ensure that she is not pregnant. And the way to do that is that she should undergo one menstrual cycle, because normally pregnant women do not undergo menstruation. It is possible that they undergo menstruation, but normally this is not the case, and we go by what is the norm. So we take from this hadith then that the Sharia gives importance to the lineage of a child, such that there must be no doubt as to who the father of the child is. So if somebody is having intercourse with a woman and he does not know if she's pregnant or not, then if she is pregnant and she gives birth, then who does the child belong to? Is it the second man or the first man, meaning the previous one? And on this point then, we have to say that anyone who attributes himself to a father who is not his father, then this is a major sin. The Prophet ﷺ expressly forbade this. He said, مَنِ ادَّعَى إِلَى غَيْرِ أَبِيهِ وَهُوَ يَعْلَمُ فَالْجَنَّةُ عَلَيْهِ حَرَامٌ. Whoever ascribes himself to other than his father and he knows what he's doing, so it's not like it's an honest mistake, he knows what he's doing, then in a case like this, Jannah is haram for him. So we can see then that this is a major sin. And we find sometimes that people may attribute themselves to another tribe or another father and give themselves another surname just in order to obtain some paperwork or some card which they want to. Basically for some sort of material gain. And they need to know that this is a major sin. And this hadith does not only apply to the war prisoners, rather it applies to if a man was to buy a servant woman, or a servant woman came into his possession not just through a war booty but rather through inheritance, let's say. So we say in all cases like these, he's not allowed to have intercourse with her until she undergoes one menstrual cycle, and this is called the istibraa, which is to see if she is pregnant or not by making her undergo one menstrual cycle, and that you're not allowed to have intercourse with her before then. What about if a woman is not menstruating? Then the istibraa is to be carried out by simply waiting for 1 month. What about if the woman is a virgin and this is known? Most scholars say that even so, she has to undergo the istibraa. Ibn Taymiyyah says, in a case like this, if you know she's a virgin, then she does not have to go through the istibraa, because there simply is no need to. And this seems to be a more practical opinion. However, we say that the safer opinion would be that it does not harm to make her undergo the istibraa. After all, it is just one menstrual cycle or 1 month of waiting. And Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, Al-Shafi'i and Al-Imam Ahmad, they say that if a man obtains a servant woman, then he's not allowed to have intercourse with her until she goes through the istibraa. Al-Imam Malik says that if the one who has bought the servant woman is sure that she is not pregnant, then he does not have to undergo the istibraa. So for example, if he knows that the woman is a virgin, or perhaps he knows that the previous owner has already undergone the istibraa, so he does not need to.
A contemporary issue related to this would be a pregnancy test. What if she just takes a pregnancy test does that mean she does not need to wait for the menstrual cycle? This would be a feasible opinion, because the only thing about the istibraa is to check that she's not pregnant, and if a pregnancy test can give us an accurate result, then one may justifiably argue that this would be sufficient, though the same cannot be said for a waiting period in a divorce, because with a waiting period, you also have the rights of the husband to consider. It's not just about pregnancy. And so therefore, in a divorce situation, we would insist that she waits out the 3 menstrual cycles.
Now we know that when a woman is in the waiting period of a divorce, then she has to wait for 3 quru, which are the 3 menstrual cycles. And Allah explicitly states that if she does not menstruate due to old or young age, or for whatever reason it is, then she has to wait for 3 months. So if the menstruation is not feasible, then we have to turn to the months. So using analogy here then, that if a servant woman is brought into the possession of a man and she's not menstruating, then the istibraa would not be 1 menstrual cycle because that's not feasible, rather it would have to be 1 month. So this is how we make the analogy, because Allah has given the months as a substitute for the menstrual cycle in the absence of the menstrual cycle. And remember, the wisdom behind the istibraa is that you must not have the lineages being mixed up, and the Sharia gives great importance to preserving the lineage. So it has laid down severe punishments for zina. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, "Ud'uhum li'abaihim." He talks about the orphans, he says, call them by the names of their fathers. So you should not say that he belongs to some other man when he does not. Their fathers must be known, and you have to name them by their fathers. So the son of such and such a man. Allah Jalla wa Ala also says, وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. And the people related to each other by blood are nearer to one another regarding the inheritance issues in the kitab of Allah, in the decree or the ordainment of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So mixing up the lineages also results in inheritance problems. Is the istibraa specific to the servant woman? The answer is no. We say the istibraa needs to be done with the wad'u shubha, the intercourse in which you think it is halal, but in fact it is not halal. So the istibraa needs to be done there as well. And so this is pertaining to a free woman. Also the woman who commits fornication, there is a difference of opinion on this issue, but we say the istibraa should be done with this type of woman, except if she is married and she was to commit adultery. She does not need to make istibraa, because if she is pregnant, then the asl is that the child belongs to her husband. And the only way the child will not belong to the husband is if the husband makes li'an about this child. So remember what we said, there are 2 types of li'an. The first one would be where he accuses his wife of committing zina. So in this case, if they make the li'an to each other, then they will be split off forever, and the child will not be his, and nobody would be given the had punishment. But then again, he can just make the li'an pertaining to the child. So he says that I'm not accusing my wife of committing zina because it may have been a wad'u shubha, but this child cannot be mine. So this type of li'an can be made according to one scholarly opinion, and this is a practical approach to take. So if a li'an of this sort is made, then they are still husband and wife, so they're not separated, but the child does not belong to this man. So it is not obligatory upon him then to spend on this child. Because remember, it could be that his wife is pregnant from the wad'u shubha. So it's not like she committed zina, but at the same time, this man is not allowed to take this child for himself because it is not his, and this will lead to a mix-up of lineage. Many scholars have said that in this period of the istibraa, not only is the intercourse forbidden, but also that which could lead to intercourse, like fondling and foreplay. However, the problem with this opinion is that there does not seem to be any evidence for this. What the evidence says is that the intercourse is not permissible. You remember the hadith preventing a man from putting his water into somebody else's crop, and also this hadith right here. It uses the word tuda, which means to have intercourse with a woman. The scholars will say, okay, there may not be any specific evidence, but we do have the general qaida in Islam, is that we block off the means which lead to haram. Whereas this is certainly true, But in this case, we also have other evidences which tell us that the asl, or the original ruling with regards to the servant women, is that you are allowed to enjoy their company, and that you are allowed to have foreplay with them and kiss them and so on. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ, except on their wives and what their right hands possess, meaning the servant women, so such people are not blameworthy. Somebody might still argue back. He might say, but hang on a minute, in the state of ihram you're not allowed to have intercourse with the wife, but we also know you're not allowed to kiss her or fondle her or do any foreplay because this could lead to intercourse. So why don't we just apply the same ruling here in the istibraa case? We say that this analogy is invalid because the fondling and the foreplay in the ihram is haram in and of itself, as opposed to the istibraa, whereas the only thing we know to be haram in and of itself is the sexual intercourse. In fact, a more proper analogy would be between the istibraa and the hayd, because in the hayd you're not allowed to have intercourse with a woman either, but you are allowed to fondle with her and kiss her and have the foreplay. And the reason how we know that the foreplay is haram in the ihram is because we know you're not allowed to marry a woman when you're in the ihram, because this will lead to the couple having intercourse with each other, and so we have to block off the means. So in the state of ihram, the situation is much more strict, whereas in the istibraa and the hayd period, it is far more relaxed. What about if a man obtains a servant woman and the previous master of the servant woman was a woman? Now we know that both of them would not be having intercourse with each other, and we know a woman cannot make another woman pregnant. So is the istibraa wajib in a case like this? Some scholars would say yes, it is, and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says no, it is not. Somebody might argue, but when she was in the ownership of this woman, it could be that another man came and he had intercourse with her. Unlawfully, of course, but nevertheless he had intercourse with her. Well, to this we say that the asl is that this did not happen unless we have evidence that it did happen. Likewise, if you know that a woman is a virgin, Ibn Taymiyyah says that istibraa is not wajib on such a woman. And other scholars will take the generality of the evidences and they will say yes, it is still wajib. And certainly this opinion does make sense to the mind, and it is practical. Although if you want to be on the safe side, then you can always do the istibraa, and this would be keeping on the safe side. And we don't see anything particularly wrong with this. If a man obtains a servant woman from another man, and the seller, or the one giving this woman as a gift, he says that I did not have intercourse with her, or that I already made istibraa on this woman, and this man is obviously trustworthy, then does the second man have to make the istibraa? Ibn Taymiyyah says, no, he does not. However, in this last scenario, you could argue back, you could say that he might be trustworthy, but there is still some suspicion on this person, because if he says that he has already made istibraa on this woman, or that he did not have intercourse with her, then he could be saying this to encourage the man to buy this servant woman. Because it could be that if the buyer knows that he will have to make istibraa, then this could discourage him from buying this servant woman. And so to encourage or entice the buyer to purchase the servant woman, the seller might say, well, I've already made istibraa, or perhaps he will say, I did not have intercourse with her. So again, just like we said with the virgin woman, we can say here as well that the safer opinion would be to make the istibraa. It does not harm. We now move to the final hadith of this chapter, hadith number 977. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: الولد للفراش وللعاهر الحجر، متفق عليه، من حديثه ومن حديث عائشة في قصة، وعن ابن مسعود عند النسائي، وعن عثمان عند أبي داود. From Abu Huraira, he says that the Prophet said that the child which is born to a couple who are wedded, then this child belongs to the marriage bed, and for the fornicator, his claim that the child belongs to him will not be listened to. What this hadith is telling us is that if a child is born to a wedded couple, then this child which the wife gives birth to will be attributed to the husband. So if another man says that in fact this child belongs to me through zina, then we would not listen to his claim. So the hajar, or the stones, will be given to him, meaning to say we do not listen to his claim. The word firash means a bed or a mattress, and it is referring to the husband here because the husband is the one who shares the marital bed with the wife. And the husband becomes a firash when, firstly, he concludes the marriage contract with the woman, and then secondly, it is possible physically for them to have intercourse with each other. So if these conditions are met, then the husband becomes a firash, and any child which the wife gives birth to will be attributed to this husband. So for example, if a man marries a woman and he is in one part of the world and she is in another part of the world, and they have not actually got together and lived under one roof, so it is impossible for him to have intercourse with her up till now, then even though they are officially husband and wife because the contract is concluded, but is the husband now a firash? We say no, he's not, because it has not been, up till now, physically possible for them to have intercourse with each other. So here now, if this wife gives birth to a child, we will not attribute it to the husband. And some scholars are of the opinion that no, just by merely the contract of the marriage, the husband becomes a firash. And so if the woman in this scenario of ours, where they are on different parts of the planet, if the wife gives birth, then it will be attributed to this husband. But the first opinion makes more sense. And also, for the husband to be a firash, there are other conditions. The ulama say he must be of an age in which it is possible for him to make a woman pregnant. So if he is so young that he cannot make a woman pregnant because he's not producing the reproductive fluid, then he's not a firash. And they have suggested that the minimum age for this would be 10 years old. But then people differ with regards to this. And another condition they say that the minimum time period that a woman would give birth in is 6 months. Although normally it's 9 months, but the minimum, they say it's 6 months. And this is taken from the Quran. Allah Jalla wa Ala says that to carry him and to breastfeed him is a total of 30 months. But in another ayah, he says that to breastfeed him is 2 years. So if you take 2 years away from 30 months, we're left with 6 months. So this would be the minimum time to give birth. So they say that if they enter into this marriage contract and this woman gives birth in less than 6 months after the marriage contract, then we can be sure that this child does not belong to the husband, because that would be impossible. So it means the woman would have had intercourse before this marriage contract. But according to the correct opinion, we say that the child is attributed to the husband when they conclude the marriage contract and they have consummated the marriage, because firash means a bed, and also it comes from when a man makes firash with the wife, he lays down with the wife. So it's talking about having intercourse with the wife. So the husband would not become a firash until he enters into the marriage contract and he consummates marriage with the woman. Because if he has not consummated marriage with this wife of his and she gives birth, then how can we attribute this child to this man when we are sure that the child simply does not belong to the man? So based upon this correct opinion, if a man enters into this marriage contract with the woman and he has not consummated marriage with the woman, and the woman gives birth to a child after, let's say, 9 months or however long it is, then this child will not be attributed to the husband because the marriage was not consummated. And we say the same ruling applies to the servant woman. Let's say a man purchases a servant woman. If this servant woman gives birth to a child, who is the father? Meaning, who is the child attributed to? Is it attributed to this man who bought the servant woman? Well, we say it is only attributed to this man who bought this servant woman if he has had intercourse with her. But if he has not had intercourse with her, then there is no way we can attribute this child to this man. What about the wat'u shubha? Well, in the case like this, if the woman has the wat'u shubha and she gives birth because of this, then we do attribute this child to the man who had intercourse with this woman, thinking that it was halal. And this applies both to the shubhatul i'tiqad and the shubhatul aqd. Remember, we said that the wat'u shubha is of 2 types. One where he thinks that he's having intercourse with his wife, and the other one where he thinks that the contract of this marriage is correct, whereas in fact it is not correct. As for a zina, then the majority of the scholars say that if a child is born to a man through zina, and this man believes that he is committing zina, so it's not wat or shubha, then the majority say that the child is not attributed to this man because of the zina. And zina is prohibited in and of itself, so if it is performed, then we do not give any consideration to its results. The opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah is that if a zani man claims that this child belongs to him, then if there is no other man, for example the husband of the woman, meaning the firash, if there is no firash or this husband claiming that no, this child belongs to him because after all it's his wife who has given birth, then if there is no disputant to the zani, then the child will be attributed to the zani. The Hanabila scholars also talk about the maximum time limit for which a woman can give birth. They give a time limit of 4 years. So based upon this opinion, they would say that if a man divorces his wife for the third time and she becomes ba'ina, then if she gives birth to a child within 4 years, provided that she has not married another man, so if she gives birth then to a child within 4 years, then this child will be attributed to that husband who divorced her. Of course, note that she must not have married during this time, because then we would attribute the child to the husband, meaning the new husband. But the correct opinion is, we don't know what the maximum time limit is. So we say whenever she gives birth, then the maximum time limit does not have a limit. It's just simply whenever she gives birth. We mentioned that the scholar said that this husband must be somebody who is able to make a woman pregnant. In other words, he must be an adult, so having reached the age of puberty. What if we doubt, has he reached the age of puberty or not? In case of doubt, we would attribute the child to this husband. And the reason we would do that is to safeguard the lineage of the child. And this is something which the Sharia requires of us. However, when it comes to safeguarding somebody's money until he reaches the age of puberty and we can give it to him, then if we doubt that he has reached puberty or not, we would not give him the money until we are sure that he has reached puberty. So notice the difference then between these two scenarios. In both scenarios, we are doubting whether he's reached puberty or not, but in the first one, we give him the benefit of the doubt that he has reached puberty, and in the second one, we don't give him the benefit of the doubt that he has reached puberty. We would say, no, we're going to wait until we are sure that you have reached puberty. And the reason for this difference, because somebody could accuse us of being inconsistent, so the reason for this difference is because when it comes to safeguarding the lineage, then this is something which Allah Jalla wa Ala requires of us, and is really looking for us to do this, to safeguard the lineage. But when it comes to giving out the wealth, then we are simply being on the safe side. And the asl is that he has not reached puberty until we are sure that he has reached puberty. So we are going by the asl here. If we have a master-servant relationship between a man and a woman, and this servant girl gives birth to a child, but the master says, no, I made istibraa on her, so she went through one menstrual cycle, so this could not be my child. Well, in a case like this, we say, okay, this is not your child, so then what about this child then? Who does it belong to? So we simply say that this child would be his property as well, just like the mother. If a man claims that he did have intercourse with the woman, but he made azl, so this is the coitus interruptus, then we would still attribute this child to him, in accordance with the generality of the hadith, al-waladu lil-firash, that the child belongs to the marital partner. Let's say if a man has a servant woman, and he acknowledges that he had intercourse with the servant woman, and then he sold her, then she is with the second man, and she gives birth in less than 6 months after the second man bought her. Who does the child belong to? Well, it will belong to the first owner, not the second one, because it's impossible for her to give birth to the second owner in less than 6 months. Remember, the minimum time period is 6 months. In this particular narration which we have with us here, it is part of a longer narration in which we had a dispute. In the Sahihain, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, one of the famous companions, and also another companion, Abd ibn Zam'ah, they disputed about a child which was born to the servant girl of the father of Abd ibn Zam'ah. So Abd ibn Zam'ah says that this child which is born, he is actually a brother of mine because he is born to my father, because the servant girl of my father gave birth to this child. So in other words, I and he share the same father, that's what he's saying, so he's a brother of mine. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas is saying, no, this child belongs to my brother Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas. He told me that this child actually belongs to him. In other words, Utbah is saying that he fornicated with the servant girl of the father of Abd. So the Prophet ﷺ took a look at the child and he saw that this child clearly resembled Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, which would then strongly suggest that this child belongs to Utbah. However, the Prophet adjudged that this child is going to belong to the father of Abd ibn Zam'ah, and the reason is because Abd ibn Zam'ah's father, he is the firash. He is the man who has had intercourse with this servant woman. So then the child is going to be attributed to the firash, who is the father of Abd ibn Zam'ah in this case. So you see here, we have a collision between two principles. The first principle is that this child resembles Utbah, so it ought to be his. This is a very strong indication we have that Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas' claim is in fact true. And this is what is apparent to us. And the judge should decide in accordance with what is apparent. However, the Prophet didn't do this, because in a case like this we have another asl which is opposing this apparent ruling. And this asl is that the child belongs to the firash, whether this firash is the master of the servant woman or the husband of the woman who has given birth. So it is this Shar'i principle which takes precedence over this natural principle that the child resembles the father. That's the natural principle. But it is opposed by the Shar'i principle, so we give precedence to the Shar'i principle. In a case where the husband knows for sure that this child which his wife has given birth to could not be his child, then we say it is obligatory upon him to negate this child, because otherwise he would be taking this child and it does not belong to him. And this will lead to the lineage being severely mixed up. And this goes against the maqasid of the Sharia. So the point is here that the child belongs to the father of Abd ibn Zam'ah. So this child is his half-brother. Abd ibn Zam'ah has a sister called Sauda bint Zam'ah. And the funny thing here is that the Prophet ordered Sauda bint Zam'ah to wear the hijab in front of this child, despite the fact that in accordance with the decision of the Prophet, this child would be the brother of Sauda, would he not? So if he's the brother of Sauda, then why would she need to wear hijab in front of him? So in a situation like this, we would say that the Prophet is being on the safe side. The Prophet knows that this child bears a resemblance to Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas, so there is the likelihood that he is in fact the child of Utbah ibn Abi Waqqas. So if that's the case, then this child would not be a mahram to Sauda bint Zam'ah. So if that's the case, then Sauda would have to wear the hijab. So the Prophet is actually being on the safe side in ordering Sauda to wear the hijab. Some scholars have used this narration then to say that when it comes to haram intercourse, meaning zina, then it does produce effects and results. Because here, the child seems to belong to Utbah, but this child is a result of zina. But despite this, the Prophet told Sauda to wear the hijab. Now if we say the presence of zina is like its absence, and this child belongs to the father of Sauda, then she should not need to wear the hijab. But because the Prophet ordered her to wear the hijab, it means that this zina which took place does have resulting consequences, such as this one here, Sauda being ordered to wear the hijab. Other scholars like Al-Malik and Al-Shafi'i rahimahumullah, they have said no, any results from zina has no consequence whatsoever. And the reason why the Prophet ordered her to wear the hijab then is keeping on the safe side. Otherwise we would not order her to wear the hijab by way of obligation.
Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Explain the 3 categories of women which are mahram to you, and then explain the different women in each of these 3 categories. Question number 2. Is it possible to be in khulwa or privacy even if you're on a public street? Explain how so. Question number 3. If a child is born to a married woman and a second man, the non-husband, claims that it's his child, and he even has a DNA test done on the child, proving that the child belongs to him. Whom do we adjudge the father to be? Is it the husband of the woman, or this man claiming to be the child and proving it with a DNA test?